God is removing people from your life, here's why. What if I told you that the loss you've been crying over was actually an answer to a prayer you forgot you prayed? What if the silence you feel from certain people is not rejection, but redirection? And what if God, right now, is quietly removing people from your life? Not to punish you, but to protect the destiny you can't see yet? Stay with me. Because by the end of this message, you may realize that what you thought was abandonment was actually divine intervention. There is a pain that feels different from heartbreak. It's not loud. It doesn't scream. It just aches. It's the pain of watching people disappear from your life without explanation. Friends who once called every day, gone. Family members who once understood you, distant. Someone you loved deeply, suddenly a stranger. And the question keeps repeating in your mind. God, why are you letting this happen? But here's the truth no one tells you. God rarely removes people suddenly. He removes them gradually. So your soul has time to catch up with what your spirit already knows. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. Have you noticed that the people leaving your life are often the same ones who benefited from the old version of you? The version that tolerated disrespect, silenced intuition, over-explained boundaries, stayed too long, poured without being poured into. That version had access to everyone. But this new version of you, the one awakening spiritually, the one asking deeper questions, the one refusing to shrink, not everyone qualifies anymore. And God, being a loving Father, will never allow people to access you who would destroy what He is building within you. Surprising truth 1. God removes people before they sabotage your next level. There are conversations that would have weakened you, advice that would have confused you, influence that would have delayed you, connections that would have drained you. So God did something merciful. He cut the signal. No fight. No drama. No closure. Just distance. Because sometimes closure would have convinced you to stay when heaven was screaming for you to leave. Think about this. If God revealed why He removed every person, you'd either become bitter or proud. So instead, He gives you peace without explanation. And peace without explanation is one of the highest signs that God is involved. Surprising truth 2. Not everyone who walks with you is assigned to arrive with you. Some people are seasonal, situational, transitional. They are not evil. They are not bad. They are simply not eternal companions. Even Jesus lost people the moment He spoke truth deeper than comfort. Many disciples walked away. Did He chase them? No. Because when God is the one doing the separating, pursuit becomes disobedience. Pause. Music fades lower. Let me speak to the wound you don't talk about. The one where you replay conversations in your head, wondering what you did wrong. Listen carefully. Sometimes you didn't change, you just grew. And growth feels like betrayal. To people who expected you to stay small. Surprising truth 3. God removes people when they can no longer recognize you. Because the old you made sense to them. The healed you confuses them. The disciplined you threatens them. The anointed you exposes them. So instead of letting them wound you repeatedly, God does something gentle. He lets them drift. Have you noticed this strange pattern? The closer you get to purpose, the lonelier the road feels. That's not a mistake. Crowds are loud. Destiny is quiet. And God often reduces your circle before He enlarges your influence. Surprising truth 4. Isolation is not abandonment, it's preparation. Every major transformation in Scripture happened in isolation. Moses in the desert. David in the wilderness. Jesus in solitude. Why? Because noise interferes with instruction. God removes voices, so you can finally hear His. Let me ask you this. If everyone stayed, would you have ever discovered how strong you really are? Would you have learned to pray deeper? Trust harder? Listen closer? Or would you have kept leaning on people instead of learning to lean on God? Surprising truth 5. God removes people who are comfortable with your pain. Watch carefully. Anyone who benefits from your brokenness will resist your healing. Anyone who enjoys your silence will fear your voice. Anyone who profited from your availability will resent your boundaries. So God intervenes. Not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. There is a moment in spiritual maturity where God stops explaining and starts aligning. You won't understand it now, but one day, you'll look back and say, "Thank you, God, for every door you closed, that I begged you to keep open." Let me say something bold. If God is removing people from your life right now, it's because your next season requires less weight. You can't carry destiny and emotional baggage at the same time. So God chooses destiny. Surprising truth 6. The people God removes are often replaced by purpose, not people. Not immediately. Not comfortably. But intentionally. Because once you stop filling the space with humans, God fills it with clarity. We go deeper. Because what you've heard so far was only the surface explanation. What God is doing in your life right now is not just removal. It is restructuring. There is a spiritual law that most people never learn until it's too late. God never builds new foundations on crowded ground. Before a skyscraper rises, everything unstable beneath it must be cleared. And that clearing phase, it looks like loss, but it is actually engineering. Let me ask you a question that might stop you in your tracks. Have you noticed that the people God removed were also the ones who questioned your calling? The ones who laughed at your faith, doubted your discipline, minimized your dreams, normalized your pain. Told you to be realistic. That wasn't realism. That was fear disguised as concern. And God refuses to let fear sit in seats reserved for destiny companions. Surprising truth 7. God removes people who only knew your history, not your future. Some people only love the version of you they could predict. But God is about to do something in your life that makes no logical sense. So he removes the ones who would have tried to explain it away. Have you ever wondered why some exits happen right before breakthroughs? Right before clarity. Right before growth. Right before peace. That's not coincidence. That's divine timing. Because God understands something humans don't. Breakthroughs attract attention. And not all attention is safe. Surprising truth 8. God removes people to protect you from premature exposure. If everyone stayed, too many would know your weaknesses, your wounds, your unfinished healing. So God hides you. Not because you're weak, but because you're valuable. Just like gold is hidden underground, until it's ready to be revealed. Now listen carefully, this part matters. Some people weren't removed because they were bad. They were removed because they couldn't go where God is taking you. And God will never sacrifice your future to preserve someone else's comfort. Let's talk about the grief no one validates. The grief of losing people who are still alive. The birthdays without messages. The silence where laughter used to be. The realization that access has ended. That grief is real. And God sees it. But here's what He also sees. If those people stayed, you would have stayed the same. Surprising truth 9. Comfort delays calling. And God loves you too much to let comfort cancel purpose. So He disrupts patterns, breaks routines, removes familiar faces. Not to hurt you, but to wake you up. You see, growth doesn't feel like motivation. It feels like discomfort. It feels like loneliness. It feels like questioning everything you thought you knew. That's why most people run back to familiar relationships, even when God has already moved on. But not you. You're still here. Which means something inside you already understands. This separation is sacred. Surprising truth 10. God removes people when you're finally strong enough to survive without them. Earlier in your life, their presence felt necessary. Now, their absence is revealing your strength. You pray deeper now. Think clearer now. Discern faster now. That didn't happen by accident. Let me say something that may shock you. Some of the people you lost were assignments that expired. They were blessings for a season, but burdens beyond it. And God, being precise, ended the contract. Here's what most people don't realize. When God removes people, He also removes distractions. Distractions from prayer, discipline, clarity, obedience, rest. That's why your mind feels quieter now. Lonelier, yes. But clearer. And clarity is expensive. It costs relationships. Surprising truth 11. Alignment always feels like loss before it feels like peace. Because misalignment feels familiar. Even when it hurts. Now listen to this carefully. This is for the ones still blaming themselves. You didn't fail those relationships. You outgrew the version of yourself that needed them. And growth always feels selfish. To people who benefited from your sacrifice. Have you noticed how God didn't replace those people immediately? That's intentional. Because He doesn't want you substituting humans for healing. So He sits with you in the quiet. He rebuilds your identity. Without external validation. He teaches you how to be whole. Before being connected again. Surprising truth 12. God removes people to teach you how to walk alone, so you never walk blindly again. One day, maybe months from now, maybe years. You'll meet new people. But they won't feel like chaos. They won't drain you. They won't confuse you. They'll feel like alignment. Like peace. Like recognition without explanation. Because by then, you won't bond through trauma. You'll connect through purpose. Let me leave you with this image. Imagine God standing at the door of your future. Behind you are voices calling your name. Familiar, emotional, convincing. Ahead of you is silence. But God is in the silence. And He's asking, do you trust me enough to walk forward? Even if you walk alone for a while. Most people misunderstand God. They think removal means rejection. They think distance means abandonment. They think silence means absence. But in the language of heaven, removal often means refinement. There is a reason God doesn't explain Himself immediately. Because if He explained everything too soon, you would try to negotiate with Him. You would bargain. You would compromise. You would say, God, let me keep this person, I'll change. But God knows something you don't. Some connections cannot coexist with your calling. No amount of prayer can sanctify what was never meant to follow you forward. Let's go deeper. Have you noticed how the removals happened? Right when you started seeing clearly. Right when you stopped begging for crumbs. Right when your prayers shifted from fix them to fix me. That's not coincidence. That's spiritual maturity triggering divine separation. Surprising truth 13. God removes people when your discernment becomes dangerous to dysfunction. When you stop being confused. Confusion leaves. When you stop tolerating disrespect. Disrespect loses access. When you stop needing validation. Manipulation stops working. So people who thrived in your blindness cannot survive in your clarity. Now let's talk about something few are brave enough to say out loud. Some people didn't leave because they stopped loving you. They left because they could no longer control you. And God will never allow love to exist where control is required. Think about this. If God wanted you surrounded right now, you would be. The fact that you feel stripped down means this season is intentional. You are being taught how to hear God without background noise. Surprising truth 14. Loneliness is sometimes the evidence that God is close. Because when He wants your attention fully, He removes the competition. There is a sacred moment in every believer's life when God says, "Now it's just me and you. No opinions. No influences. No emotional crutches. Just truth. And truth is quiet. Let me speak to the one who feels guilty for letting go. You weren't cold. You weren't heartless. You weren't wrong. You were obedient. And obedience often looks cruel to people who benefited from your disobedience. Surprising truth 15. God removes people when staying would cost you integrity. And integrity is more valuable than attachment. Now listen, this part is heavy, but necessary. Some relationships were not removed because they were sinful. They were removed because they were subtle. Subtle distractions. Subtle compromises. Subtle drains. And subtle things are the most dangerous. Because they don't feel wrong. They just feel off. God doesn't wait until poison kills you. He removes the cup early. Have you noticed how your prayer life has changed? You're not praying louder. You're praying deeper. You're not asking for signs. You're asking for alignment. That shift required solitude. Surprising truth 16. God removes people to reintroduce you to yourself. Before labels. Before roles. Before expectations. So you finally meet who you are. Without applause or pressure. One day, you'll realize the people you lost made room for the person you became. And you wouldn't trade who you are now for who you were then. Even if it meant keeping everyone. Let me say this slowly. If God allowed them to walk away without a fight, it's because they already left spiritually. The physical exit just caught up later. Surprising truth 17. God removes people who are no longer spiritually present. And keeping them would have meant living with ghosts. Now imagine this. What if God didn't remove them? What if they stayed and slowly eroded your faith? Diminished your confidence? Delayed your obedience? What you call loss might have saved your soul. This is why peace came after the pain. This is why clarity followed confusion. This is why strength replaced desperation. Because God was never destroying your life. He was editing it. Surprising truth 18. God edits before He elevates. And editors are not emotional. They are precise. There is a future version of you who will thank God for every unanswered call, every broken routine, every relationship that quietly ended. Because those endings were entrances you couldn't see yet. And when new people arrive, and they will, they won't need convincing. They won't need chasing. They'll recognize you instantly. Because alignment recognizes alignment. You didn't lose people. You lost resistance. You lost confusion. You lost limitation. And what God removes, He always replaces with something greater. Even if that something is strength first. If your heart feels lighter, but your eyes feel heavy right now, that's healing. That's God proving that you can survive what you thought you couldn't. And now, we arrive at the part few ever reach. Because understanding why God removes people is only the beginning. The deeper question is this: what happens after the removal? Here is a truth that may change how you see everything. God never removes without intention. And He never leaves a vacuum. When people leave your life, something else is already moving toward you. But it cannot arrive until the space is clean. There is a reason God does not immediately replace people. If He did, you would never feel the weight of transition. You would never sit with the lesson. You would never learn discernment. So God allows the gap. Not to punish you, but to prepare you. Surprising truth 19. The gap between people is where God trains discernment. It's where you learn who to trust, what peace feels like, how alignment sounds, when to walk away without explanation. Before this season, you needed reassurance. After this season, you'll recognize truth instantly. Have you noticed how you're no longer chasing closure? You don't need explanations like you used to. That's because healing does not demand answers. It demands acceptance. And acceptance is power. Now let me say something that may shake you. Some people were removed. Not because they were wrong for you, but because you were about to idolize them. And God will never compete for a throne in your heart. Surprising truth 20. God removes people who are slowly replacing Him in your dependence. Not because love is wrong, but because misplaced reliance is dangerous. So God pulls gently. Not to take love away, but to put it in its proper place. Let's talk about destiny companions. The people God sends after pruning feel different. They don't rush you. They don't confuse you. They don't drain you. They don't require masks. They feel like peace, not pressure. And you don't recognize them with excitement. You recognize them with calm. Fire. Surprising truth 21. Destiny connections feel familiar without history. No chaos. No proving. No over-explaining. Just recognition. Because alignment doesn't argue. This is why God had to remove the old ones. Because the new ones would not survive in crowded space. They require room. They require clarity. They require healed versions of you. Let me speak to the fear still whispering in your heart. What if no one else comes? That fear is not prophecy. It's residue from past dependence. And it's lying to you. Surprising truth 22. God does not isolate people He plans to abandon. He isolates people He plans to introduce properly. Do you know why God took people away before bringing new ones? Because He didn't want your future relationships to inherit unresolved wounds. So he healed you first. Not quickly. Not easily. But thoroughly. One day you'll realize something beautiful. The loneliness didn't break you. It refined you. It taught you how to choose wisely, love intentionally, and walk away peacefully. Surprising truth 23. Peace is the reward of obedience you didn't understand at the time. And now, you're different. You don't overextend anymore. You don't chase anymore. You don't beg anymore. You listen. You discern. You trust God's silence more than people's promises. This is what maturity looks like. Not hardness. Not distance. But clarity. And now we arrive at the quiet truth that most people only understand after the storm has passed. God does not remove people to make your life smaller. He removes them to make your vision clearer. Because when too many voices surround you, you mistake noise for wisdom. You mistake familiarity for loyalty. You mistake history for destiny. So God thins the crowd. Not because you don't deserve love, but because you deserve alignment. Let me ask you something gently. When those people were still in your life, were you truly at peace? Or were you constantly adjusting, explaining, tolerating, shrinking? Because peace is not loud happiness. Peace is ease. And if something required constant emotional effort to maintain, it was already costing you more than you realized. Surprising truth 24. God removes people when maintaining access to them requires self-betrayal. And God will never ask you to betray yourself to keep a relationship alive. Here's something few people notice until it's gone. Some relationships survive only because you keep carrying them. You initiate. You apologize. You explain. You forgive. You reach out. So when you finally stop, it collapses. Not because you failed, but because it was never mutual. God didn't destroy it. He just stopped giving you the strength to keep carrying what was never meant to be yours alone. Surprising truth 25. God removes people by removing your tolerance for imbalance. Now listen carefully, because this is deep. God is not just removing people externally. He is removing patterns internally. Patterns of overgiving, people-pleasing, self-abandonment, fear of being alone. That's why this season feels uncomfortable. You're not just losing people. You're losing old reflexes. And here's why that matters. If God brought your future connections too early, you would have repeated old patterns with new faces. So God delays the people until the patterns die. Surprising truth 26. God heals patterns before He sends partners. This is why you're becoming selective without trying. You no longer chase chemistry. You look for character. You no longer crave attention. You value consistency. You no longer fear being alone. You fear being misaligned. That is not loneliness. That is wisdom being born. Have you noticed how your standards didn't rise out of pride? They rose out of pain. Pain taught you what prayer didn't yet have language for. And God used that pain to sharpen your discernment. Surprising truth 27. Discernment is pain that learned how to speak wisely. Let's talk about the moment that scares most people. The moment you realize you don't want everyone back. That moment comes quietly. You don't feel angry. You don't feel bitter. You just feel done. That's not hardness. That's closure without conversation. That's healing reaching completion. God doesn't always give closure through explanation. Sometimes He gives it through clarity. And clarity changes everything. You stop romanticizing the past. You stop rewriting history. You stop blaming yourself. Because now you can see clearly. Some people weren't meant to walk with you. They were meant to wake you up. Surprising truth 28. Some people are catalysts, not companions. They trigger growth, not longevity. And once the lesson is learned, the connection expires. Now hear this deeply. If God removed someone without drama, without confrontation, without chaos, it's because you were finally mature enough to let go without destroying yourself. That's growth. That's evidence of healing. One day, and this day will come, you will sit in a room with people who don't drain you, who don't confuse you, who don't require masks. And in that moment, you'll realize something profound. The old losses were necessary to recognize real peace. Surprising truth 29. Peace feels boring to trauma, but safe to healing. This is why God had to separate you. Because your nervous system needed rest. Your spirit needed quiet. Your soul needed space to breathe. And people who thrived in chaos could not accompany you into calm. Now listen, this is important. What God removed was never punishment. It was protection disguised as pain. It was mercy disguised as loss. It was love disguised as silence. When God removes people from your life, it does not mean they will never knock again. Sometimes they return. Not because God sent them back, but because they felt the shift. They felt the access close. They felt the version of you disappear. They felt the power change. And suddenly, they remember your value. Surprising truth 30. People often return when they sense you no longer need them. Not when they miss you, but when they realize they lost control. This is where discernment matters most. Because not every return is a restoration. Some returns are tests. Tests to see if you've healed. If you've learned. If you'll choose peace over familiarity. Let me say this carefully. If God truly removed someone, He will not ask you to reopen the door He Himself closed. God does not undo His own protection. So how do you know the difference? Here is the answer few people like to hear. What God restores comes with peace, not pressure. No guilt. No rushing. No emotional leverage. No manipulation masked as apology. Just clarity. Surprising truth 31. If reconnecting costs your peace, it's not God's will, no matter how emotional it feels. Because God does not lead through anxiety. He leads through assurance. This is why your heart hesitates now. Not because you're afraid, but because you're aware. Awareness changes everything. Let's talk about the ache that still surfaces sometimes. The memory. The nostalgia. The what if. That doesn't mean you're supposed to go back. It means you're human. Healing doesn't erase memory. It just removes its control. Surprising truth 32. Missing someone does not mean they belong in your future. Sometimes you miss the role they played, not the person they actually were. God understands that grief. He doesn't rush you through it. But He also doesn't let grief rewrite His instruction. Here is something sacred. God often removes people before you fully see why. Because if you saw everything clearly at once, you would have stayed too long, trying to fix what wasn't yours to fix. So He leads you by peace, not by proof. Surprising truth 33. God protects you from explanations that would have broken your heart too deeply. Silence was mercy. Distance was kindness. Now listen to this slowly. You are not behind. You are not late. You are not missing out. What left was not your destiny. It was your lesson. And lessons don't come back. They complete their purpose. And move on. One day. And this day is closer than you think. You'll look back at this season. Not with pain. But with gratitude. Because this was the season. You stopped abandoning yourself. The season you stopped shrinking. The season you chose truth over attachment. Surprising truth 34. The moment you choose yourself with God, everything else rearranges. Let me speak to the quiet confidence forming inside you. You don't announce it. You don't explain it. You don't defend it. You simply walk differently now. And people notice. Some respect it. Some resent it. But either way, you are no longer available for what God already removed. That is growth. That is obedience. That is alignment. We arrive at the truth beneath all truths. The reason this season feels so intentional is because it is not random loss. It is divine timing unfolding slowly. You see, God does not operate on urgency. He operates on readiness. And readiness is not about how badly you want something. It's about how prepared you are to keep it, without losing yourself again. So God waits. He waits until your boundaries stop feeling guilty. Your peace stops feeling unfamiliar. Your solitude stops feeling scary. Only then does He move. Surprising truth 35. God delays connections until you no longer fear being alone. Because fear-based attachment always recreates old wounds. This is why nothing rushed into your life after the removals. This is why doors stayed quiet. This is why time slowed down. God was not withholding. He was stabilizing you. Let's talk about the shift that's happening now. You don't feel desperate anymore. You don't feel incomplete. You don't feel like something is missing. You feel grounded. And grounded people don't attract chaos. They attract alignment. Surprising truth 36. When you become whole, God sends people who add, not replace. They won't save you. They won't fix you. They won't complete you. They will walk with you. And here is something deeply sacred. The right people arrive quietly. No emotional storms. No dramatic entrances. No confusion. Just presence. Just consistency. Just peace that doesn't need explanation. Have you noticed how your prayers have changed? You're no longer asking God to bring people back. You're asking Him to bring truth forward. That prayer is answered with discernment. And discernment protects you better than any apology ever could. Surprising truth 37. God answers maturity with clarity, not comfort. Let me say something that may settle your spirit. You were never meant to keep everyone. You were meant to keep what aligns. And alignment is rare. That's why your circle feels smaller. But smaller does not mean weaker. It means stronger connections. With less resistance. Now hear this deeply. God didn't remove people to isolate you forever. He removed them to recalibrate your heart. So you would recognize real connection. When it arrived. Because without contrast, you would have mistaken intensity for intimacy again. Surprising truth 38. God uses absence to teach discernment. So presence can be recognized instantly. One day soon. You will laugh again without tension. You will talk without overthinking. You will rest without fear. And in that moment, you'll realize. This peace required loss. But the loss was worth it. Let me leave you with this final knowing. Nothing God removes was meant to stay. Nothing God delays is meant to be lost. Nothing God prepares you for will arrive empty-handed. You are not being punished. You are being positioned. You are not forgotten. You are being refined. You are not alone. You are being aligned. And when the next chapter opens, and it will, you will walk into it lighter, clearer, wiser. No bitterness. No resentment. No regret. Just gratitude for a God who loved you enough to remove what you couldn't. And here is the deepest layer of all. The layer God only reveals after you stop fighting the process. At some point in this journey, you realize something quietly powerful. You're no longer asking why people left. You're asking who you are now that they're gone. And that question changes everything. Because when the noise leaves, identity begins to speak. Not the identity shaped by survival. Not the identity shaped by approval. But the identity shaped by truth. This is where God wanted you all along. Let me say this plainly. Some people had to leave. So you could finally hear your own voice. Not the voice trained to please. Not the voice trained to explain, but the voice that knows when something is right, without needing permission. Surprising truth 39. God removes people so your inner authority can emerge. Before this season, you asked others before trusting yourself. Now, you listen inwardly first. That is not arrogance. That is alignment. Notice how you no longer overshare. Notice how you no longer rush to be understood. Notice how you no longer feel the need to prove your intentions. That's because peace does not argue. And healed people don't chase validation. This is why God had to make you still. Because stillness reveals truth. That movement hides. There is something else happening now. Something subtle but irreversible. Your nervous system is recalibrating. You're no longer drawn to chaos. You no longer romanticize intensity. You no longer confuse anxiety with love. Your body itself has learned the difference. Surprising truth 40. Healing shows up as what no longer excites you. What once pulled you now repels you. And that's how you know this transformation is real. God didn't just remove people. He removed the version of you that accepted less than peace. That version doesn't exist anymore. And the old doors don't recognize who you've become. Here's the final truth most never hear preached. God is not preparing people for you. He is preparing you for people. People who won't need saving. People who won't need fixing. People who won't need convincing. People who come whole. Surprising truth 41. The right connections don't arrive dramatically, they arrive naturally. They don't feel like fireworks. They feel like safety. They feel like breath. They feel like rest. And when they come, you won't cling. You won't fear loss. You won't abandon yourself. Because you'll know something unshakable. You are already complete. This is why God trusted you with this season. Not everyone could survive this level of pruning without becoming bitter. But you didn't. You became clearer, quieter, stronger. Let this truth settle fully. Nothing was taken from you. Everything was repositioned. And what's ahead will not require you to beg, chase, or explain. It will recognize you. So if you're listening to this with a calm heart and steady breath, then this message has done its work. You understand now. God removed people from your life because He was removing limitations. And what He's building next will not collapse under the weight of the old. It will stand. Not into noise. Not into explanation. But into embodiment. Because at this stage, God is no longer teaching you through loss. He is teaching you through who you are becoming. There comes a moment in every spiritual journey when lessons stop arriving as pain and start arriving as discernment. You don't learn anymore by being hurt. You learn by seeing clearly. And clarity is quiet. Notice this shift. You don't feel the need to announce your growth. You don't need to prove healing. You don't need witnesses. You simply move differently. That's how you know this season is real. Surprising truth 42. When God finishes pruning, He replaces explanation with embodiment. You don't explain boundaries anymore. You live them. You don't warn people anymore. You choose differently. You don't fear losing people anymore. You fear losing alignment. This is where power actually lives. Not in control. Not in influence. But in self-trust under God. Let's talk about something subtle but profound. Have you noticed that fewer things trigger you now? Words that once hurt now pass through you. Silence that once scared you now feels neutral. Distance that once felt like rejection now feels like information. That's not emotional numbness. That's emotional sovereignty. Surprising truth 43. Healing doesn't make you colder, it makes you unshakable. God did not harden your heart. He strengthened your center. And there's a difference. This is why God allowed the removals before the elevation. Because elevation amplifies everything. If insecurity went with you upward, it would have destroyed you. So God healed you first. Now hear this carefully. The people who belong in your next chapter will not be impressed by your wounds. They will be drawn to your wholeness. They won't need to rescue you. They won't need to compete with you. They won't need to diminish you. They will recognize you. Surprising truth 44. Right connections don't ask for access, they offer reciprocity. This is why God delayed them. Because reciprocity only works when you no longer overgive. And now, you don't. Let me speak to the quiet confidence inside you. You know when to leave now. You know when something is misaligned. Without waiting for it to hurt. You know when God says, no. Even if emotions say, maybe. That is spiritual maturity. At this level, God doesn't shout. He nudges. And you listen. This is also why people from the past may no longer recognize you. They remember a version of you that no longer exists. And that's okay. Growth does not require permission from those who knew you before. Surprising truth 45. You don't owe access to people who only knew your survival self. Now let this settle deeply. You are not waiting anymore. You are available. Available to peace. Available to truth. Available to alignment. And availability under God is far more powerful than chasing anything. This is where life begins to meet you. Not dramatically. Not loudly. But steadily. Doors open without force. Conversations feel clean. Opportunities feel calm. Because you're no longer desperate. You're aligned. And alignment is magnetic. Let this be the final truth that seals everything. God removed people from your life so you could finally stand fully as yourself. Without apology, without fear, without fragmentation. And now, nothing that arrives next will require you to lose yourself again. Nothing. You are ready. And the chapter ahead will feel less like survival and more like home. If and when you want to continue, we can keep going endlessly. But for now, let this truth live in you. If people left your life recently, don't rush to replace them. Sit with the space. Listen to what God is building in the quiet. Because when God finally fills that space, He doesn't fill it with noise. He fills it with alignment. And alignment feels like home. Without explanation. You didn't lose people. You lost what was blocking your next becoming. And God, who sees what you cannot, chose your future over your familiarity. Trust Him. If you're still watching right now, it means God spoke directly to you through this message. And I want you to do something powerful. Like this video.